What is the nicest thing a stranger has done for you? Story 1. A really small thing, but I hope I remember it forever. My son was probably 2 or 3 and we went to the mall for some reason. My son liked looking at displays and stuff. Well, there was a model train set in a case that you could put a $1 in and watch them go around for a while. I was pretty broke if I recall and never had cash on me regardless. He was content just looking at the display. A group of loud mall teens come through and go past. One of them comes back and puts $1 in the machine and says, "I always liked watching trains too," then hurries off back to his friends. My son lit up. I never would have expected that action from a stranger, let alone a teen with his friends in a mall. Story 2. My first wife abandoned us when my son was an infant. It was rough, but I survived. One evening I was at dinner with some friends. I had to change the baby. There was no table in the men's room. I asked a lady leaving the ladies' room if it was empty and she checked for me, gave me the okay. While I was trying to get my diaper bag sorted, she came up and offered to change him. I told her I had it, but she insisted and put her arm around me. Apparently I'd been holding in a breakdown the whole time and she saw right through it. I cried for a minute while a total stranger changed my infant son, thanked her profusely, and went back to dinner with my friends carrying a little less weight on my shoulders. No clue who she was, but she was an angel to me that night. Story 3. My flight out of Syracuse was canceled, and when I finally made it to the front desk they told me it would be 2 days before I could get home. I decided I'd rent a car and drive to NYC to catch a flight out of one of the airports. As I was getting to the counter, a woman, whose flight had also been cancelled, announced she was driving to NYC and welcomed anyone to join her. On an impulse I said yes, and we started the journey to NYC. She turned out to be one of the kindest people I've ever met. While calling AA to figure out my next situation, the customer service person was incredibly rude and refused to do anything, eventually hanging up on me. Seeing I was frustrated/upset, this wonderful woman proceeded to call customer service agents over the next 2 hours. I would explain my situation and she would pretend to be my mother and ask for a solution. Ended up getting fully refunded and booked on another flight the next morning. I was planning on just sleeping in JFK until my flight, but she offered her couch in her apartment and a hot shower. I refused at first, but the prospect of a hot shower after such a stressful day was too much for me to pass up. On the way to her apartment, she even asked the cab driver to go a little out the way to swing by some famous sites in NYC because I'd never been. I still think about her often and wonder if she realizes how big of an impact her kindness had on me. Story 4. I was at a bar with my then girlfriend. Seated next to us was an older gentleman who was alone and looking forlorn. After a time, he tapped my girlfriend on the shoulder and said, "I like the way you two talk to one another. Here's what I'm going to do. I spent a fortune on these tickets for my wife. Unfortunately, she can't go anymore, and I just don't feel like going without her. So I'd like you two to have them. The only catch is that the concert starts in 20 minutes. He didn't elaborate, nor would he accept payment. He asked only that we go, enjoy ourselves, and keep being good to each other. He paid his tab and left. And that's how I got front row seats to Prince. Story 5. I'm a bit of a town mouse, but I spent a summer in the country with relatives as a teenager. Very rural, with miles between some houses. I love long walks, and one sunny day I decided to take a very nice one. There was this big road that led around the area in a circle. Looked like a good couple of hours of strolling. This was before smartphones, so I couldn't gauge the distance perfectly, but I was convinced I could handle it. Grabbed a soda and a freshly charged MP3 player and set out in the afternoon, convinced I would be back by dinner. I had made a bad misjudgment of scale. After several hours of walking, I was nowhere near home. My phone had no signal. Dumbass city slicker me hadn't even considered that there were no streetlights and no cars. It was getting dark and I could barely see the road beneath my feet. Chances of a Leatherface attack had gone up about 1,000%. Houses were extremely far apart too. I passed one and knocked on the door, but no one was home. I seriously debated going to sleep on their porch and hoping someone would eventually turn up, but in the end I kept walking. Finally I found a house with a light on. I banged on the door, and a middle-aged woman answered. The first words out of her mouth were to straight up ask if I was there to rob her. Refreshingly direct, really. I assured her I was harmless and explained my situation. Her demeanor flipped 100% from suspicious to charitable. I had just hoped to use her phone, but she insisted on driving me home herself, and also on feeding me. The route she took continued around the loop, and I realized I had barely made it halfway, and B, hers was the last house for a very long while, and things got a lot more woodsy after that. If she hadn't helped me, I would have been walking all night through the woods. Story 6. I once got on a train late at night. I was going from start to end of the line to change, which was nearly an hour's journey. When I got on the train, there were two other people. One young man and a much older, grumpy-looking man. After the second stop, the young man became aggressive toward me for rejecting him and was trying to pull me off the train to do God knows what to me, and the old man helped me get him off the train and away from me. After I thanked him and he calmed me down, I was very upset. He sat down in the row behind me and looked out of the window. When I got off, he did too. He waited on the same platform as me, just further down from me, so I assumed he was waiting for the same connection. He wasn't. Train comes and I get on. I see him stand up, wave, and walk to the stairs to get back to the platforms going the other way. That man had missed his stop, waited on the wrong platform, and then went right on back, all while saying nothing, just to make sure I was okay. I think about that man often. I wish I could thank him for that. Story 7. In college, my car broke down halfway through my third year and 1 week into my new job about 20 minutes away. A lady from my church, who I had never met, calls me and asks me if I'm interested in an '04 Toyota Corolla. It was 2011 at the time. I lived about a 5-minute walk from the church, and she told me to walk down and give it a test drive. I was previously driving around an '89 Thunderbird, so I assumed I probably couldn't afford it, but decided I'd meet her anyway. I get there and she shows me the car. Great condition, 89k miles, no way I can afford it. She sees my face, and before I can admit that, she says, "Let's go for a drive." "Have you had lunch?" She has me drive to lunch, which she pays for, and stops for ice cream on the way back. "Nothing like ice cream in the winter," she says with a little smile. Some time passes and we're about finished with our ice cream. "Okay, now, let's talk details," she says. "Do you like the car?" "Oh yes, it's lovely, but Do you think it'll meet your needs?" "Yes, but..." Well then, my husband and I were thinking, and we remember how hard college can be, so how would $500 sound? At this point I'm stunned. I paid more for my clunker. Wow. "Oh dear, is that too much? We can go lower if you need it." I nod my head and agree that $500 is perfectly reasonable. She instructs me to take the car to the tag office, and I do. That afternoon I returned to the church parking lot, the official owner of a lightly used, excellent condition, 2004 Toyota Corolla. She even apologized, telling me, "I'll leave the XM stuff in the car, but we won't keep the subscription for this one. Hope you don't mind." Of course I didn't mind. I mean, I basically had lunch with Jesus that day. I saw her maybe one time after that. We went to different church services, drove that car all through grad school, and then gifted it to someone in need when I moved cross-country. Never felt like I could sell it after that. Story 8. When I was 11, I was stupid enough to cross in front of a bus with only a cursory glance backwards, and I missed the minivan that had just started to overtake the bus. I got hit by the left-hand corner and flung across the road, injuring my legs. My knee still hurts sometimes all this time later, and splitting my lower lip. As I lay there, a lady who I had seen on the bus a few times came over and helped me over to the curb, checked me over, made sure my parents were called, made sure an ambulance was called, and generally looked after a scared, tearful, hurt little boy. She was wonderful, and I still see her around to this day, and she always gives me a big smile when I wave hello. Story 9. My birthday one year was really sucking. I decided to go buy myself a cake at the grocery store and get it decorated, because it was my birthday and I wanted something nice. When the guy at the counter asked who it was for, in retrospect he meant what name to put on it, and I said it was for me. He was incredulous that I had to buy my own birthday cake. I just kind of shrugged and went out to finish shopping for groceries. He said my cake would need to be paid for at pickup. When I came back to pay for and pick up my cake, a different person was at the register and she said my cake had been paid for. It was also decorated a bit more than I thought it should have been. I have not seen that guy working there since, and in my head I've called him the cake fairy. It was a good cake. I still cried eating it because the entire day sucked, but it was a good cake. Story 10. I helped a guy go through TSA at LaGuardia in NYC. Around 2008-ish. He'd never flown before, had no idea what he could take on the plane, how much, etc. Security told him he couldn't use his plastic bags he has his stuff in. Anyway, what rattled me was the fact that he was shoving pairs of very new Nikes into a trash bin. I couldn't fathom why, so I went to ask. He explained his situation, so I told him that if he held tight, I'd go through security, buy him a carry-on so he could get his stuff through. He handed me $100 and I gave him my crochet project bag to hold as insurance. Got him a suitcase, went back and gave him it and the change, and showed him how to go through, remove your belt and shoes, etc. He thanked me and we hugged, going our own ways. My flight was delayed by 3 hours at the last minute and I was already exhausted. I used my purse as a pillow and covered up with my coat, and fell asleep against a wall. When I woke up, there was a fuzzy travel blanket, convertible neck pillow, eye mask, a bag of cookies, and a little plush dog with a note tucked in his collar. He stuck this gift between me and the wall and never woke me up. I ended up traveling for 11 more hours and that thoughtful little package saved my sanity. Random airport dude, I'm glad you got to keep your kicks, and I still have the puppy. I named him LG. Story 11. I was struggling to carry all my books after I got off the bus and they didn't fit in my bag since I already had 4 other textbooks in my bag and I couldn't get on my bike, so a lady ran out of her house and gave me a bag and I almost cried because that was the nicest thing a stranger has done for me. Story 12. When I was about 21 I was walking to the cab office alone on Halloween, dressed as a slightly slutty Cheshire cat, shorts, fishnets, heeled boots and tank top, but had a large coat and cardigan over it. My now ex-boyfriend had left me to go home alone because he was having too much fun, and halfway to the cab off 3 guys started harassing me, asking me how much it was to screw them, asking me to suck their dicks, and just making me really scared. A random dude walked up behind me, gently put his arm on my back and asked me, quietly, if I was okay. I just shrugged it off. It was a bad area, and he walked a little ahead of me. The 3 guys didn't stop, so I ran up to this guy and asked him to pretend to be my boyfriend while I walked. He was lovely, and put his arms round my shoulders and just walked me to the cab office. The 3 guys backed off afterwards, but he stayed with me the entire time and made sure I was okay. I never found his name out, and I barely remember what he even looked like as I was so scared, but I haven't forgotten that one random act of kindness. I genuinely think that if he didn't help me out that night I would have ended up in hospital after being sexual assault. Story 13. Somebody did this to me and my fiancé too. I've posted about it before. We were at McDonald's, with our book bags on and bundled up because we were homeless. We just wanted to get a drink to be able to sit inside and wait a few minutes before heading out to Panhandle. We ordered the drink, but were paying with mostly nickels and dimes, and then got down to the pennies. I had dropped some of the change and both of us were flustered trying to scoop it up. A woman tapped me on the shoulder and said, "You dropped this," and handed me something, and took it and realized it was cash. And looked closer and realized it was $100 bill. Which obviously I had not dropped. I looked back for her, but she had gone back to her table already. I nudged my fiancé and handed him the money and said, "This woman gave me this so we can get some food. Will you order us some meals?" and went to the bathroom to cry. He didn't even realize what was going on. He thought I had handed him a 10. He only realized what was up when the McDonald's dude gave him $90 in change. I went to her table to thank her on the way out and she hugged me. Very nice McDonald's lady. There were always kind people when I was homeless though. A guy who gave us $20 at the train station. All the people who gave money while I was flying my sign. People who took me to eat or brought warm food. I was a heroin addict, at the end of my rope, wanting to give up, and all this constant generosity moved me. I started out panhandling mostly to buy heroin, eat and sleep in the shelter. After a few months of this generosity, I started taking the money to the methadone clinic instead. Now I've been at the methadone clinic for 2.5 years, live with my family, have a car and a job. And I try to pay it forward and give to homeless people whenever I see them and can afford it. Story 14. Went up to snowboard in Park City, totally forgot my snowboarding mitts at home and was gonna board barehanded, cause I wasn't about to drop $50 on a pair of gloves. This dad with 3 kids overhear my conversation and offers me to borrow his extra pair of gloves for the day. Mind you, this man has never seen me before. I could have walked away with the gloves and not say a word after the day. He gave me his number, not the other way around, and just text him when he's done so I can drop it off for him. 5 to 6 hours later, I call this man up and he already left the mountain. I end up hiding the gloves behind a booth and send him a picture of where it's at, because he planned on coming back up the mountain again. Genuinely amazing man. Wish I could have left some cash or something for him, but I didn't have any on me. Story 15. My mother and I were visiting Carlsbad Caverns, NM back in 2011 or so when the tank hit empty just as we got there. We didn't worry as we saw a gas station right before the main entrance. However, we got done in the caverns and came out to find the gas station closed and not even taking credit cards. It's the only one without going back to town, which we couldn't make it to. As we're standing there trying to see if we had service and what to do, a young couple comes up and asks what's wrong. We explained the situation and they suddenly offered to grab us some gas from town and bring it back as they were running back to town for something before continuing back on the same highway. They told us to go grab some food at a nearby cafe and they'll find my car and leave the gas can for us. We offered them money, but they didn't want any, saying it was just a couple bucks to fill my small can. So, we trust them and go grab food. As we're coming out, there's my gas can, full, sitting next to my car. I'm so thankful for that random lovely couple. I also now prepare better in regards to my gas tank. Story 16. I bought my condo at 27 from a guy I've never met. There were a lot of offers way over asking price in a competitive market, but I offered what I could. I had lost out on many places before over months of searching, being outbid by ridiculous cash offers I had no chance of beating. I fell in love with this neighborhood and made 2 other failed offers here earlier, so I wrote him a letter just telling my story, how hard I tried to save everything I could to buy my first place and make a home and start really establishing myself. He ended up taking my offer over much higher bids because he bought this place decades ago when he was a struggling 27-year-old trying to establish himself, and my letter resonated with him. He probably could have made another $40,000, but he wanted to give me the opportunity he had. I'm forever grateful. Story 17. I love telling this story as it helped me fall in love with the city I just moved to. So here I am, a 23-year-old graduate who's just moved to a brand new city for my first real adult job. I just finished my first week of work and my colleagues had decided we would go for an after-work drink in the city center as we have half-day Fridays. I, living in the city center, get to the bar first as it was just around the corner from my home. As I'm standing at the bar looking up at the drinks menu taking in all the options, a chap comes in, stands next to me and says, "What a lovely day it is." And I respond politely agreeing, and he carries on making conversation. "So, what brings you to the pub so early?" To which I explain how I just moved to the city, just finished my first week and about to have my first beer in the city. "Ah, well then, welcome." Eventually the barman comes up to me and asks what I'd like, and as I answer, the man I just met went, "Oh no, I'll get this chap's drink. It's on me." I then thank him and respond, "Ah, it's alright, you don't have to." No, welcome to the city. I just hope that one day when my son has his first beer after his first week, someone would do the same for him. That small act of kindness from a random stranger welcoming me to a new big scarify city made me know straight away I was going to like it here, and I love it. Story 18. I posted this before somewhere else, but it's easily this. This happened during the dark days of my childhood, in the mid-80s. I was 10 years old, and I was having serious problems with my family, mostly my father, and was doing absolutely miserably at school. That year, I had the bad luck to have a really bad music teacher. Now, music wasn't a big subject, we had one lesson a week, but that person made it a living bad for me. Looking back now, I think he was just a quirky character, but he had an extremely short fuse and was prone to switching from hearty, belly laughter to shouting and roaring at someone for nothing at all at the drop of a hat. I just never knew where I was with him, and adding that to my problems at home just brought me to the brink. One day in December, my mother had promised she'd come to school on the day we had music lessons, and she'd have a word with him. So I stood in front of the classroom, waiting for her. And she didn't show up. My brain just went into complete panic mode. I could not face that teacher on my own for another lesson, I just couldn't. So I walked away, and walked out of the school. I walked through the town. I walked through the outskirts of the town, and through the industrial area around that. I walked through the first village, then the second village. It was very cold, and there was a lot of snow on the ground, so I wasn't walking fast, but I just kept walking. At some point, a car pulled up next to me, and a man, probably in his 30s, whines down the window and asks me if I wanted a lift. I said no, thank you. I had no idea where I was heading myself, after all. And as a young girl, I had been warned about taking lifts from strange men. I just kept walking. Through the next village, and the next. It was beginning to get dark. I had started to cry, I was feeling worn out, and tired and so cold. I must have been walking for the better part of 6 hours at that point. Then that same car pulled up next to me again, and the same man asks if I wanted a lift now. I really didn't care about anything anymore, so I got in. It was warm in the car. He started chatting to me, easy and friendly. Even offered me a cigarette, which I found very odd. Eventually, he got me to open up a bit and tell him why I was walking down country roads in the middle of winter all by myself. How I felt my parents would be better off without me, how I felt they didn't care and hated me. He kept talking to me about my family. Who else I have who might care about me? So I tell him about my grandmother, I've always been really close to her. He's asking me if I wouldn't like it if he dropped me off to her house? And then see if maybe I can stay with her instead of my parents? I'm just so exhausted at this point, and I agree. He turns the car around and drives back. And on the way, he tells me that he'd been thinking about me on that road the whole day, since he had first asked me if I needed a lift. That he'd left work early to drive around and see if he could find me, to make sure I was okay and safe. He dropped me off outside my grandmother's house and drove off. My grandmother gave me the longest, hardest hug anybody had ever given me, and I stayed with her for the next couple of weeks, until things settled a bit. I never told anybody about getting a lift from a total stranger, but I've never forgotten him. And I never will. If I ever find myself in a similar situation, I hope I'll be as sweet and kind as him. Story 19. Easter Day 2013 car was broken down in a small town between Arizona and Utah. Alternator was broken. Was 18 at the time with 3 other friends. A man saw us all panicking as we were trying to get back to our college town. He had been a mechanic or something and recognized that we had something wrong with our alternator. He spent 3 hours working on fixing it and only asked us for the money it costs for the new part he needed. Once he finished, we drove 2 miles and broke down again. He had been following us to make sure we were okay for the first few miles, and then got a rope and pulled us back to the shop/gas station area he was helping us at. He spent another 2 hours and fixed it perfectly. We drove home and came home perfectly. Throughout all of this, him and his girlfriend were bringing us water and buying us pizza. For absolutely no other reason than being a good person, this man spent his entire Easter Sunday helping a group of poor college kids get their car fixed and back to their college town. Story 20. Thanksgiving Day, 2003. I was driving down to my parents on Long Island from Buffalo, a 7 to 8 hour drive. As I'm about halfway, I get a blowout. The tire is just shredded. I managed to get the donut on and slowly got into the next town. Most of New York State is just farms and nothing. I stopped at every store that would conceivably have a tire, but nothing was open. I stopped at a police station. They told me to get a hotel until tomorrow. So I hop back into my car and try to make it to the next town, try there. That's when my donut went flat. So I get out and start walking. It is 2003, I don't have a cell phone, so I knock on the first house I can find, hoping they'd let me use their phone so I can call my parents. The lady who answered the door invited me in, let me use her phone, offered me food and then, to my complete shock, called her friend who owned a used car dealership, had them tow my car to the dealership and put on a new tire, free of charge. I went from completely missing Thanksgiving and having to spend the night in some crap hotel outside Binghamton to being back on my way within 2 hours. I'll never forget that lady. Edited, a word. Story 21. I've posted this before, but it's seriously one of the most wholesome moments of my life. In 1990 I was 19 years old, driving cross-county by myself and all I have is $63 and a Texaco card. I'm close to empty one night somewhere in Iowa and pull up to a Texaco station about 5 minutes after they closed. I was trying to only use my Texaco card and conserve what little cash I had. The person working the station wouldn't open to give me gas, so I decide that I'll just put all my clothes on, it was December and about 11 degrees, and sleep in my car until they opened in the AM. About 2 AM I hear a tap on the window and I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the car. It was the sheriff. Phew wuck. I explained what was going on. He ran my ID to make sure I didn't have warrants or anything and then ominously states, "That's not how we do things around here." OMG, I was terrified. How do you do things around here? What's going to happen to me? Apparently he was pissed that the guy at the gas station left me there. So he calls the owner of the gas station, makes him come down in the middle of the night and fill my gas tank for free. Then the sheriff calls his wife, lets her know what's going on, and she tells him to bring me over to their place. Mrs. Sheriff proceeds to feed me, let me take a shower and sleep there until the next morning. Then she feeds me again, packs me a lunch, gives me $20 in cash and sends me on my way. It was seriously one of the most wholesome things that has ever happened to me. Story 22. My fuel pump died 100 miles from home. He helped me get my truck out of the road, then drove me to 2 auto parts stores to get what I needed to fix it. Stuck around to get additional tools needed along the way, and it was pouring. For my truck, I had to also drop a skid plate and drop my fuel tank. Story 23. Happened last night. As a single father, I consistently question the decisions of my parenting. Never had kids before, and I have a 9-year-old now. Grew up as an only child, so needless to say I'm pretty awkward around kids. Told my kid last night, no books or phones or whatever while we had dinner at our fave Mexican joint. We talked about various things, and he and I played trivia of his favorite things. Not entirely sure what the next table heard, but as we were leaving the guy, probably mid-50s, goes, "Hey dad, you're doing a good job." I don't really know why he was saying that, but it was nice to hear from someone. Story 24. Once, I was carrying my sobbing infant in the grocery store while waiting in line to check out. I was super overwhelmed. It was my first trip out after my son was born, and a kind older man said, "One day, you're going to look back on this with happy memories and even miss these moments." He then insisted that I cut in front of him in line and bought all of my groceries. Man, that made a huge impact on me. What a wonderful man. Story 25. Going through the line at Aldi and I had a bunch of stuff for Wick. Cheese, milk, yogurt, cereal, and juice for my pregnant with twins girlfriend. Find out Aldi doesn't participate in the WIC program and oh crap, I'm broke otherwise. I apologize and ask if they could restock it for me, and out of nowhere this nice lady says she can cover it. I say wow thank you but not needed as I can go to Walmart down the road. She insists, tells me congratulations, and best wishes for the babies. She really restored a lot of my faith in humanity that day. Story 26. After long delays, my flight was cancelled while I was standing in line at the gate to board it. Next day was my son's first birthday. I needed to be home. Went to the United desk and they refused to help me in any way. Not only could I not get another flight that day, but nothing the next day either. Despite the fact I was interneting the crap out of my phone and showing them all sorts of flights, direct and connecting that would get me there, they were refusing, and I just didn't have money to go buy something else. I was starting to lose my cool. A guy in line stepped out after hearing me. Told them he was some crazy status, and asked to speak directly to the manager. Next thing I knew, he was transferring his own ticket on a direct flight to me so I could get home to see my boy. I don't even know what happened. I tried to thank him in every way I knew how, and he refused to take anything from me, just told me he knew how it was when he was younger, and would have wanted someone to do the same for him. I hugged the guy, probably against his will, and ran and made his plane and was in a first-class seat home. Seriously, dude was an angel I'll never forget. Story 27. After a rehearsal I was directing for a performance of Handel's Messiah in church just before Christmas one year, a lady approached. She had been sitting in the open downtown city church as a visitor, listening to the orchestra, choir, and soloists. The lady was obviously moved by the music, especially that Hallelujah chorus, which was sung just at the end of the rehearsal. She said that I had a way with the ensemble that encouraged them to perform at their absolute best. I was astonished when she took out her checkbook and wrote a check payable to the church's music department for $17,500, asking that it be an anonymous gift toward funding future concerts open to the public in the downtown area. Story 28. Paid for my wife's medicine when we were waiting in line at the pharmacy. My wife was really badly burned in a cooking accident, and that day the medicine was $75 for some lotions and pills. He paid for all of it, really took us by surprise. Edit, didn't know this would become my top upvoted comment. A couple people seemed to be confused by how it went down, probably due to my bad writing. And I think this story needs a little more background. In summary, we were waiting in line at the pharmacy and he approached my wife and I because she had a walker, was 21 at the time. He also came up to me first because I was wearing my USMC shirt. At the time I had been a pulley for 9 months and was back from a workout session with my recruiting office. He asked me when I was leaving for boot camp and I told him I was leaving in the next 2 months. We ended our conversation because he got called up to the counter and asked us to come with him and bought her meds there. I still do feel kind of guilty as I never was able to go to boot camp and become a Marine. My wife went through emotional and had severe PTSD. I could not bring myself to leave her. So I put an end to my initial contract. If you're out there reading this, sir, I am sorry. Edit 2, people want to know what happened. It was her birthday, I was at work and she wanted to make apple fritters. She decided to heat some oil for deep frying. We had a gas stove and the oil boiled and caught fire. She freaked out and tried to pour it into the sink, but it got spilled all over her legs and stomach. The kitchen was also partially on fire. And she was trapped in the house as I had locked the door on my out. Her hands were covered in oil and our doorknob was round and she could not get it opened. She ended up spending 2 weeks in the hospital with 2 major surgeries. She spent 3 months at home where her mother and I took care of cleaning and changing her bandages every day. I got really good at bandaging on the bright side. I am very thankful to her mom that temporarily quit her job to come help me as I was working 60-hour weeks, plus my mandatory USMC pulley training 2 times a week. Edit 3, thank you all for the kind words and thank you for the gold. After reading all of these comments, my wife and I are going to take a serious look at the Phoenix program. Again, thank you all. Story 29. I've told this story before, so here is a copy/paste. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1, so I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away and I went back to my piles, able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me, having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading. This was probably about 20 years or so ago, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. Story 30. I sent a screenshot of your story to a friend of mine once. She loves to read, and is 100% going to be the older lady in your story someday, and your story made me think of her. Anyway, she read it and told me, "Oh yes, I will always do this for kids, because your mom did it for me." I had no idea what she meant, and asked her to elaborate. When we were about 13-14, we went out with my mom for the day and ended at the bookstore, like outings with my mom are wont to do. My friend had a small stack of books she was looking at, but only had the money for one. My mom bought them all, 4 or 5 new hardcovers, because she said that all kids need new books. After my friend told the story, I vaguely remember it happening, but to her, it meant the entire world. I'm so proud to call that woman my mom. Story 31. Not me, but what my mom did. My mom went for a blood pressure test as she found out she hasn't been tested for a while, so her doctor suggested just to make an appointment. This appointment was 8:30 a.m. I was with her as I work at the same place as her, and it would be just a quick appointment in the mornings before work. Basically, the nurse couldn't get the machine to work, so had to do it the old-fashioned way, and she noticed that Mom had an irregular heartbeat, which made Mom spiraling, as that's what her mom had and died of a heart attack. So this quick appointment turned into 12 hours in A&E, emergency room. Once she had been jabbed and tested, she was allowed to go home. I was with her the whole time, refused to leave her. So as we were heading home, Mom wanted a coffee, and we ordered and collected our drinks. And police officer walked in and ordered. My mom quickly went up to him and offered to pay for his coffee, which confused the officer as he thought he had helped her or something, and she just goes, "Nope, just had a rough day and wanted to share some kindness." After the day my mom had, and she still wanted to share kindness. Story 32. Many years ago, when I was first married, we had very little money and were living paycheck to paycheck. You know how it is, stretching that last few bucks for a week or longer, just trying to scrape by until payday. My wife was pregnant with our first, and I was working a part-time job. I went to the store a few days before payday to get only what we absolutely needed. Some bread. Some dishwashing soap. I think a jar of mayo. In all, about $10 worth of stuff. At checkout, I swiped my debit card, hoping it would clear. I didn't know my balance. The cashier deadpanned, "Declined. Try again." I asked her to put an item back, then I swiped with the new total as a line formed behind me. The cashier, now perturbed, declined again. "Please take this other thing out, cashier." Swiped again. Declined again. I felt the eyes of the shopper cue on me, the pressure of the cashier's impatience, the shame of not being able to afford basic groceries, the shame of everyone in line having a pretty good idea of my pathetic bank balance. I hung my head when I swiped that last time, but I was still ashamed when the card was approved for buying that measly loaf of bread. I took my receipt and slunk out to my car, wanting to disappear, feeling absolutely humiliated, an embarrassment, a failure as a provider. Almost to the car, I heard the voice of a little girl behind me, the girl who was standing with her mother right behind me in line. "Mister! Mister!" I turned around, and she reached out to hand me a plastic grocery bag. It was filled with the items I had the cashier put back. "It's okay, we bought this for you." Surprised, shocked, actually, and humbled, I mumbled a thank you, walked to my car, put my head on the steering wheel and bawled like a baby. With shame, with gratitude, with the absurdity of the situation, with disappointment in myself as the breadwinner yet not being able to take care of basic needs. It's been about 25 years, but that memory is still vivid, and I'm still grateful to that little girl and her mom, and I still cry when I think of how such a small act can mean so much for a person in need. Since then, I've helped people whenever we could afford it, yep, even in grocery lines, and I remind myself that sometimes I really believe these angels have bodies of flesh and bone. Story 33. Me and my then GF walked in a donut store about 5 minutes before they were supposed to close. We didn't know. So we asked about the flavors and were deciding in which one we should get, and the lady at the cashier said, "You know what, I'll just give you one of each." We're closing anyways. Here, and proceeded to bag 6 or 7 donuts. I said, come on, at least let us buy one and then we'll tip you really well, to which she replied, pay it forward. Back then I was working at a cafe and we also had lots of pizza waste every day. I had the habit of bringing it home to my roommates sometimes, but never once thought of just giving it away like that. I started to always give the pizzas to homeless people after closing. Good times. Story 34. When I was 18, I rapidly went blind. Unfortunately, because my mother is a garbage human being, I ended up not mitigating it or getting any devices that could help. Imagine using your phone with wax paper as your screen protector, and that's pretty much how it was for me to use my phone. Eventually, I got a MacBook and could use it, but the condition that caused my blindness also causes extreme head pain, like migraines but worse. That means, on my bad days, I couldn't use the computer because the text-to-speech is like an ice pick to my brain. I posted in a Facebook group asking about Braille displays, and if anyone had one that they weren't using anymore, acknowledging that it's a long shot. Someone that I'd never really talked to offered to send me one that had been in her closet for a little while. Mind you, a cheap display at the time was around $2,500, and because you can ship things to blind people for free, she sent it and didn't ask for anything other than for me to let her know if it still works. Unfortunately, the plug slot is sort of hit or miss and tends to make the display turn on and off rapidly, but it's still great and I do use it when I'm patient enough. Hopefully, will get together the $500 to buy a new display at some point, but living on disability means that if you save any money, things will come up and eat your savings. Story 35. I was in my way back to college after the holiday break. As I get off the highway, I notice the dashboard lights on my 85-foot Chevy K5 Blazer are dim and sort of pulsing. Not a good sign, so I pull into the next gas station I see. I made the mistake of turning the truck off. Sure enough, it won't start because the batteries seem dead. I figure I need someone to jump-start the truck. I crap you not, the next person that walks out of the gas station is an Elvis impersonator. I ask him for a jump and he says, "No problem, man," in an Elvis voice. He jumps my truck and leaves. The truck was still acting funny with little to no power, so I decided it wouldn't be a good idea to leave the station. I call my girlfriend and tell her the situation. She and her dad drive about 45 minutes and meet me at the gas station. We have the hood up and are looking in the engine compartment to see if we can find an obvious problem. Girlfriend's dad isn't very mechanically inclined and neither am I, so I really don't know what we were expecting to find. As we are looking under the hood, a guy coming out of the gas station asks what the issue is. I explain how the truck was losing power and the lights were dimming. He immediately says it sounds like I'm missing a belt. He shines his flashlight under the hood and sure enough, I am missing the serpentine belt. This guy then offers to get his tools and fix my truck, but I would have to come with him to buy the belt. I say okay and my girlfriend and I hop in his big pickup truck. He explains that he has to get his tools from his house up the mountain. Okay, no problem. We drive for about 15 minutes up this mountain, and we see fewer houses the further we go. Some thoughts run through my head that we are about to end. We get to his house, which is completely dark. He hops out and says he'll be right back. We can hear a large dog barking, which made us uneasy. Then my girlfriend looks in the back seat and sees a bunch of rifles. We are freaking out at this point. A couple minutes later he comes out with a toolbox and throws it in the bed. He then opens the back doors and grabs a rifle. Oh crap. I just want to put my rifles away while I'm here. Okay, so he's not going to end us. Heart stops beating out of my chest. He hops back in the truck and drives us to an auto parts store. Tells them what we need and I pay. We get back to the station and he has the belt on in probably less than 15 minutes. Truck starts right up and is running fine. I thanked him and tried to offer him some money, but he wouldn't take it. He just says to pay it forward if I ever see someone in need. Nicest thing a stranger has ever done for me. Story 36. I was living in Oakland, broke as crap, and ran into the back of this dude's Escalade on my motorcycle. It was stop-and-go traffic, I had just come into the lane from a turn and wasn't paying attention. Ran right into the back of him, left a sizable dent where my shoulder made contact, and knocked some of the lettering off that said Escalade. We both pulled over. He was super cool about it. Asked if I was alright. We started talking about motorcycles and how he rode one. We talked nonsense for about 20 minutes, and I told him I was new to the area. At the end, I gave him my insurance info and phone number. He never called my insurance and never called me again. I assume he just repaired it himself or with his insurance because he could tell I couldn't handle the expense. I am super grateful for that because I absolutely could not handle the expense. I was a 24-year-old dude on a motorcycle. Insurance was already ridiculous for the liability I had, couldn't afford full coverage, and I was not sure how I was going to pay for it. My bike was fine, so I never reported it either, and now I just remember the kind gesture and hope I can help someone in the future the same way. Story 37. It wasn't for me directly, but for my daughter. She has an inoperable brain tumor and had to go through chemo. Because of the amount of time she was in treatment, in the hospital, and out of school sick, we went to a one-income household so I could stay home to help care for her. Money was very tight. In the hospital she was treated, it was about 2 hours one way, and with having to go there for treatments, testing about 6 times a month, gas and related expenses were draining us. One visit, after she had had scans and chemo, her dad took her in the gift shop to get some water for the drive home while I went to the hospital pharmacy to get her at-home meds. She came out with a stuffed animal, a raccoon. He later told me that she saw it and fell in love with it, but we couldn't afford to buy it. He told her she could carry it around until it was time to pay her water. When they got to the counter to pay, the teenager working told her someone else had paid for it for her. She was beyond excited. I was in tears. This simple stuffed raccoon went to every chemo, test, scan, follow-up, new specialist, checkup appointment with her. It's been 3 years, and although Rack has seen better days, he still goes everywhere with her. She's 9 now. Rack is still her lovey, even though he waits in the car for most appointments except oncology appointments. He sleeps in her bed with her, hangs out on the couch while she's at school, and has brought her so much comfort. My daughter is a very talented artist, and Rack has been the subject of her written stories, compete with her drawing the pictures for her books. She has raccoons everywhere now, shirts, posters, blankets, calendars. Every time we see something with raccoons, we get it. All thanks to a stranger paying for a $8 stuffed animal at a hospital gift shop. When she went into remission and things got better financially, we started leaving money at the gift shop counter for another person's child. I hope someone else can experience the joy on their child's face that I've seen on mine. Story 36. My BF and me had to recently move because the owner of our old apartment sold the house and wanted us out. So we did find another fast but had no car to get our stuff there. That's why we did it all after 22 o'clock until 2 o'clock in the morning, 30 days in a row. After work and university we'd pack boxes, easily 2 to 4 loaded on each of us. Next a backpack with our books and stuff sticking out. Like this we hurried to the next tram station and squeezed in between the people, apologizing for the space we needed. During this month I never met so much kindness. People were starting to hold open doors when we almost missed the tram. They helped us to load and unload the boxes and even helped us to pick up our DVDs after one box decided to fall over. They made sure we had enough space so that we could get out swiftly. It was a tough month, but we really enjoyed it. Story 37. I've never been super attentive with laundry timing. I always think I'll remember or notice the machine stopping while I'm doing something else, but I never do. In college, I knew that crap gets stolen, but once or twice I would leave something in a dorm basement machine for hours on end. Dryer is fine, but washer is worse, because now I need to wash it again to get the mildew out, and someone probably just took my wet clothes and put them on top anyway. 3 times though, a strange thing occurred. Each time, I left full loads of laundry in the washer and did my absent-minded thing. Each time, when I finally remembered, I found my clothes on top of a dryer. Clean, dry, folded, organized. I still don't know who it was. Story 38. When I was 18, I tried to commit suicide by overdosing on various medication. I was taken to urgent care, and there was a bit of a wait to see the single doctor available. I think 2 people were ahead of us. The guy ahead of me in line had hurt his knee something awful and was in serious pain, but when the doctor came to call him into the office, he looked at me and my parents and told us to go first. It's been almost 14 years, and I'm still kicking myself about it because I can't remember if I managed to say thanks to him. I was really out of it because of the overdose, and the next thing I can remember is waking up in a hospital bed 3 days later. Thanks, man. I hope your knee injury healed well. Story 39. When I was hugely pregnant with my son, now 2, I had to stay at work in our downtown office later than usual one night. I was living in Chicago and the Cubs were playing in the World Series that night, so it was so busy with people trying to get home/get to a bar. Right before I left, it started pouring rain. Like buckets and buckets of raining dumping everywhere. I had no umbrella and a thin non-waterproof jacket. I was wearing Toms that immediately got soaked through and became slippery. Uber was insanely priced and the wait time was crazy. I ran to the corner after leaving my building where I thought I could find a cab more easily. There were about 4 other people waiting to snag a taxi as well. Even with the awning, we were all just soaking wet in minutes. 2 of the 4 finally abandoned the endeavor and ran inside some restaurant. Rain soaked through the jacket and my sweater and then my tank top. My socks and shoes and jeans were soaked. After about 20 minutes of waiting and freezing in the rain, a cab pulled up in front of us to let 3 people out at their destination. The guy who was waiting with me was there before me, so it was his cab to take. He approached the cab window and the driver cursed at him and goes, "I'm not taking any more customers. I'm locking my door." This dude yells back, "You're really going to leave this pregnant lady standing out here soaking in the rain at night by herself? I don't care about me, just take her home." The cab driver was pissed but was like, "Okay, fine." The guy, hadn't spoken to him, never met him before, ushered me over and opened the back door for me to get in and shut it. I managed to squeak out, "Thank you so much." He then just stepped back onto the sidewalk to continue to get rained on. Truly one of the most chivalrous things I've ever witnessed. I sobbed. Story 40. I was like 10 years old, at Disney World with my family. I had a fear of roller coasters, but for the most part, I could handle what Disney offered. We were at Epcot that day, and Test Track had somewhat recently opened. I loved cars, and I also loved all of the mechanics of designing them, so it was completely up my alley. While we were waiting in line, however, you can hear the cars roaring by outside on the track. And they play up the crash test theme of the ride, which really started to freak me a little bit. After standing in line for about 5 minutes, I had thoroughly psyched myself out and decided I couldn't handle the ride after all. The rest of my family wanted to go on it, so I just ducked out of line and walked outside to sit and wait for them. I was so ashamed of myself, both disappointed, because I really wanted to go on the ride but was too scared, and also just angry at my own cowardice. I started to sort of softly cry while I was sitting outside waiting, not calling a lot of attention to myself but just sort of feeling terrible, and it was washing over me. At that moment, a small voice asked me what was wrong. I looked up and through my tears, there was a boy who couldn't have been much older than 6 or 7 who had seen me crying and wanted to see if he could help me. For some reason I felt like I could be open with him, and I told him that I wanted to ride Test Track but I was too scared. He said that he had ridden it and that it was great, and that I could definitely handle it. He was really supportive and tried to build me up. Even as a 10-year-old, I was really taken aback by how thoughtful and empathetic this young boy was being towards me. He even tried to give me his fast pass so that I could get on the ride quickly. He wanted to sacrifice his own short wait in line so that I could go instead. It's a bit fuzzy in my memory, but it felt like he spent like 5 minutes with me trying to help. I've never forgotten that kid. I wish I could say that I took him up on the offer and rode Test Track, but I didn't. I don't know where he is now, but he made such an impact on me that a young stranger could see someone in pain and want to help in any way they could. I've gone on Test Track now, and it's super fun. He was right. I probably could have handled it. Wherever he is, I hope he's been able to hold on to that youthful kindness. He's made me want to be a better person over the years and follow his example. Story 41. I had recently been approached inappropriately by a security guard 4 days into starting my new job. I made sure to report it to my workplace, in which they immediately fired him. My work hours means that half my shift I spend alone with just him and maybe a student or two. In addition to this past week has been a week where for some reason random people like to come up to me in the street and harass me/be super rude. I go into work the next week to find that my work had hired a new, female security guard. She was super lovely and friendly. As I left my shift today, she personally escorted me out of the building and watched as I walked down the street to my bus stop safely. This made me feel safe and like there are actually good people in the world. Her act of kindness and actually going out of her way to not only do her job but also make sure I'm safe when I leave work just made me feel so happy. Story 42. I lived in Japan for 3 years, and although I was reasonably fluent enough by the end of my stay, at the beginning I was functionally illiterate. One day, early on, I was working at a school that was far away from my home base and waiting for the bus home. A bus rolled up, I got on, all seemed well, until I realized we were rolling past landmarks and places I'd never seen before. In a panic, I asked the driver if this was the bus going to a popular downtown landmark that I knew would position me in a location where I could get home easily. He said no. I started to panic. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, and I had no clue where the bus was going either. Just as I was starting to panic, a woman got up and motioned to me. I got off at her stop, and she led me across the street, and then she said in perfect English, "The next bus will take you to landmark I had asked the driver about." She waited with me until the bus came, too. One of the kindest things a stranger ever did for me. She refused to accept any of my profusely stammered thank yous. Story 43. My first time driving home from school was in the middle of that huge blizzard Portland had a few years back. I had just left when it hit hard. I'm Californian, I'd never driven in snow before, but I learned fast. By the time I got into a hotel not even an hour's normal driving away, but all day away in this insane weather, I was cold, I was wet, I wasn't wearing proper shoes, I was exhausted, I was having an allergy attack because something in my car's ventilation didn't agree with me. Basically, I looked the epitome of miserable. I trudged across the street from my hotel to the Denny's and sat down, had some food, probably looking like bad warmed over. At the end of my meal, when I asked for the check, the waitress said an anonymous stranger had paid for my meal. Asked if it was Christmas spirit, or if I just looked that pitiful, but I was incredibly grateful. Turned my mood right around. Went back to the hotel, took a hot shower, went to bed happy, and made it home safe. Story 44. I was headed into Hurricane Irma as the shelter lead for one of the affected county's pet-friendly shelters. I stopped to get gas just outside of town, knowing that once I got into the city limits it would be a madhouse of people still evacuating, and I didn't want to take gas from them, but knew I was going to need it to drive back and forth between the 5 shelters. This was an old gas station with the old rotary pumps, not digital, no pay at the pump, so I had to go inside, tell the attendant I was filling up, then go back in to pay afterwards. I was in uniform, organization shirt, radio clipped to belt and shoulder, the whole have my crap out together look, and a very old gentleman was on the other side of the pump from me in a banged up beater of a truck that looked like it was about to fall apart. He had his animals with him, 2 larger mixed breeds, and he noticed my shirt and we began chatting about where I was going and what I was doing. When he finished, he went to pay, came out and thanked me for putting myself in danger just to make sure others' pets were safe, shook my hand and drove off. I finished pumping and walked inside to pay. The older gentleman in the old beat-up truck had left $80 with the cashier. He paid for my gas and requested that I use the rest of the money for supplies for the shelters. I almost cried. I asked if the man left his name and the cashier said he hadn't. I bought what was left of the gas station's cases and gallons of water and some Gatorade with the change from my filled gas tank. I still think of that old man and hope him and his dogs are still out there in his old beater truck. Story 45. I just finished typing this and I'm gonna put a TLDR at the bottom cause it got long, but it was cathartic, so I'm keeping it. I got emotional. For reference, I'm 20 and live at home. My mom has been in the hospital for almost a month now. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2015 and it's spread since then. We've been in and out of the hospital a lot but never for this long. It hasn't been this bad for a long time. It's not the cancer anymore, she had it surgically removed, but the treatments and scar tissue are catching up and she's starting to deteriorate. I have no siblings and my father lives in the next town over and can't help with anything. We lived with my grandma for 7 years before moving her to a care facility when it got too much a year ago. I feel more alone than ever. I have some family and friends who help, but everyone has their own problems too. I have to deal with being without my mom, who's my best friend, getting used to being an adult, all alone in my grandma's empty house that used to be lively and now has gone to crap. I was sitting in one of the hospital's side rooms while my mom was sleeping. I cried a little, but it gets tiring after a while and I just stare out the window. At this point we had no idea what was wrong with her. I was confused and scared. An older lady came in and simply asked, "Who are you here for?" I said my mom. We talked for a while. I told her what was going on. She went quiet and went to talk to the nurses. She came back to tell me someone would come talk to me. It felt nice to have someone do something for me. I have a lot of anxiety and I know the staff are busy without me asking a million questions while trying to understand. I'm still working on reaching out and asking for help, and this whole situation has forced a lot of progress, lol. A nurse did come talk to me. She explained what they knew so far. It helped a little, but the lady came back in and said a little crafted cardinal that I'm sure they have a million of in the gift shop. But she talked about how cardinals are a holy animal, they mean good luck, God's watching, all of that. We talked for a long time about luck and good feelings and our loved ones being sick. She hugged me before she left and I teared up. She reminded me of my grandma and I felt cared for the first time in a long time. She only told me everyone called her dough and her husband Buck. I'm not even religious, but nothing will remove the value of that cardinal she gave me. I guess in practical terms she didn't do much, but it helped me feel like I could get through things on my own. TLDR, older lady talked to me while my mom was in the hospital, helped me feel like things weren't going downhill and I should have faith in things ending okay, gave me a little cardinal that I'm sentimental about now.